This is Diana Lovell, and this is a very brief history of Yarnton Manor. Since at least Saxon times, Yarnton Manor meant an agricultural estate, not necessarily a stately home. The most detailed historical research done is actually prehistoric. Oxford University scholars and archaeologists have been working at Yarnton for a couple of decades, and there are books out very recently about Yarnton's Neolithic and Bronze Age settlement and landscape, and Iron Age and Romano-British settlement and landscape. These can be purchased at Abe Books. Now, Yarnton as a place name doesn't come into being until around 1517. In the Old English, it's more like Erdington and Yarnton, and the first time we hear about it as being pronounced as Yarnton is in 1570. In the Saxon era, which is before 1066, the era right before William the Conqueror takes over England, when the Anglo-Saxon kings were still in control most of the time, the agricultural estate of Yarnton Manor was given into the hands of the abbot of Inisham. You may have seen signs for Inisham as you drove to Yarnton. It's not very far away, and a very large abbey was there. This is a rendition of how it might have looked. And it was a need of a lot of financial support for such a complex medieval institution, and Yarnton Manor was part of that financial support for this abbey. Then 1066 occurred, and William the Conqueror, the French Duke of Normandy, at least he's under the French king, he conquers England and starts taking all or most of the land and giving it to some of his supporters. And so one of the men that came over with him was named Remigius de Fécamp, and he was a Benedictine monk, a supporter of William the Conqueror, related to him in some way, but we're not sure how, and he was a monk at a very prestigious and large abbey in France called Fécamp, which is where his name comes from. And he not only gets Yarnton, which is just a small part of the gifts he gets from William the Conqueror, but he also is made Bishop of Dorchester and of Lincoln, and here is his grave at Lincoln Cathedral. Now, in the Norman era in Yarnton, there is a 12th century church built. This is not a picture of it, but this is a picture of a 12th century church that has survived, and this is what the interior of it might have looked like. In the late 13th century, the Earl of Cornwall, who is a big supporter of the Cistercians, holds the manor and gives it to Rewley Abbey, which is located in the city of Oxford. Now, Oxford's Rewley Abbey, originally in the Middle Ages, sat behind the Syed Business School. You've probably seen this architecture from the late 20th century. It's very, very close to the train station in Oxford. And so this is a rear view of that business school. And on the left is a drawing of what that abbey would have looked like. And so all the profits from Yarnton went to support this scholarly abbey, where they did a lot of scholarship and studying, and it supported them. It's only 4 or 5 miles away. Back at Yarnton Church, as you enter, you will see a early 14th century cross, which is on your right here. A plinth has been broken and knocked off, and the top is probably missing. It has a lot of carved statues, and it is really rare to have one of these surviving. It's got that circular staircase, and the bottom pedestal has many carved figures on it. It's been there since probably around 1300. It's very, very early 14th century. Now, Inisham also has one, and here's an old picture of it. And again, these are very rare, and this might show some connection between Inisham originally and the church at Yarnton. When Henry VIII comes to the throne, he eventually breaks from Rome, dissolves the monasteries, and confiscates all their lands, including Yarnton, into his own hands. He is flush with land and wants to be flush with cash, and so he sells a lot of those properties, and Yarnton is one of them. And he sold them to a friend, one of his physicians, a man he knew personally, and this would be a great opportunity to purchase land, because this had been very rare to be able to purchase land before this, because there was not very much land for sale, because it was tied up in the feudal traditions and legal ramifications of that, and also because the Catholic Church owned so much land. And so George Owen gets this land, and this is patronage on behalf of Henry VIII, and makes this man and others that he sells land to very loyal to him. Henry VIII's daughter, Elizabeth I, is pictured here, and in 1586, during her reign, the Spencer family begins to own Yarnton, and they will be there for over a century. And it is the Spencer family that builds the manor house that you are probably sitting in today. The one we see, and so many aspects of that house are original to the Spencers building it in 1611. The Spencer family is really famous, and they are such an important family that Churchill is descended from them, and Lady Diana Spencer is descended from them as well. After Elizabeth dies in 1603 without having any children or ever marrying, the King of Scotland inherits the English throne by right of descent. He was James VI of Scotland. He becomes James I of England, and he has a favorite named Sir Thomas Spencer, and he gives him a baronetcy. He already owns Yarnton Manor, but in the year 1611, Sir Thomas Spencer is given the title Sir, and he starts the building of the stately home that you're sitting in now. His father was named William Spencer, and William Spencer had died just a few years before 1611 in 1609, and Sir Thomas Spencer built a big, huge effigy tomb for his parents. And here is William Spencer, the father's face. And if you go in Yarnton Church into the Spencer Chapel, you will see this very early Stuart effigy and tomb. And his son, Thomas Spencer, Sir Thomas Spencer, is in miniature down below with all of the children of this marriage. So if you go in there, that's what you'll see, their coat of arms and this really ornate and well-preserved effigies. And then you'll see the next generation, a couple generations afterwards, you'll see over here in another Sir Thomas Spencer. Perhaps the most famous and well-known event in Yarnton's history is when Charles I may have stayed at Yarnton Manor while he was trying to escape the siege of Oxford during the English Civil War in 1646. Here is Charles I on horseback, and he was king during an era when England was ravaged by civil war. The headquarters of the king was in the city of Oxford, and Yarnton held a royalist military hospital, and many of the men who died at that hospital are buried in the church. When the royalists begin to lose control of Oxford, the king tries to escape, which he does, and probably stays the night at Yarnton, at least one night, in 1646. In the same year that Charles I loses his head and Oliver Cromwell takes over control of the government, Sir Thomas Spencer, who has the same name as the first baronet, inherits Yarnton. And you can see his grave inside the Spencer Chapel in the church across the way. By 1712, the Dashwood family has ownership of Yarnton Manor. And the second of the Dashwoods is named Sir James Dashwood. And he has another estate, which is his primary home. It's just 8 miles away from Yarnton. It's called Kirtlington. And he takes a lot of the stone away from Yarnton Manor in the dilapidated wings of the building and uses that stone for his new Palladian mansion that he's building, which is very close by. In the 19th century, there are two things of particular note. First, there's a very long-serving vicar named Thomas Vaughan, who would have started in the Regency era and served many, many decades after that. He was also the vicar at Stoneleigh Abbey, Stoneleigh in Warwickshire, and very well may have known Jane Austen as a result, because Jane Austen's family held that manor house and that large estate. And also Henry Robert Frankland, in the very late 19th century, about 1897, restores the manor house. It had long been neglected, and hires a Gothic revival architect named Garner. And that is probably a blessing that it had long been neglected, because it meant that so many of the original features from the 17th century survived. And if the landowners, manor house owners before had kept up with the latest fashions, we would have lost a lot of that original 1611 features of the house that you may see as you are touring. In the 20th century, there are many owners of Yarnton Manor, including Oxford academics, and it serves a lot of educational purposes, including becoming the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, until in the 21st century it becomes the Lanier Theological Library. And that ends my presentation on Yarnton Manor, A Very Brief History. Thank you.